Welcome to this week's edition of Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Chi-Chen Lo. In today's Taiwan, democracy has become a very important way of life. However, the process of democratization did not come into being until the early 1990s, when Taiwan has the first direct election of the presidency and the full election of legislative body. In year 2003, Taiwan made one more step forward in terms of democracy when we introduced the so-called referendum law. However, since then, there have been a lot of controversies surrounding the issue of the referendum. So what are the experiences and lessons we can learn from other countries? In today's program, we'll be discussing the issue. In today's program, we are very delighted and honored to have a very important and very famous scholar on the issue, Professor Dane Waters. Professor Waters, welcome to our programs.
Thanks for having me today.
And Professor Waters is the chairman of the Initiative and Referendum Institute in the States. So is referendum becoming an international trend all over the world?
Referendums and initiatives are growing in just about every country except for the United States. It seems like in the United States it's becoming less and less because of rules and regulations associated with the process. But in Europe especially, and in Asia and in Latin America, the use of the referendum process has grown because of greater citizen involvement and the desires of the citizens to be greatly involved in their day-to-day lawmaking.
But in a way that it undermines the so-called representative democracy in some way. So would that be a replacement to the so-called representative democracies?
Well, a lot of people like to argue that the referendum process is a replacement to representative government, but it's not. It's designed to be a check and balance on representative government. A perfect example in the United States is that when it deals with tax issues or term limits or issues like in Europe when it comes to joining the European Union, it's an opportunity for the citizens to deal with issues that elected officials don't want to deal with.
That's right.
So it's clearly not a replacement to representative government, but an enhancement to it.
Okay, but what are the actual purpose of having a referendum for many new democracies?
Clearly to be a check and balance on government. It gives the citizens, I mean, even emerging democracies, when they're coming into a new democracy and they don't have the history of whether they can trust the legislature per se, it's critical to have the referendum process as part of the Constitution so they can have that check and balance. Look at what's going on in Pakistan today. I mean, the reality is that the citizens had some other kind of tool to check government. Maybe some of the issues happening there today wouldn't be occurring.
Are there any different types or categories of the referendum?
There are three distinct parts that we talk about. There's what we call the initiative process, which is where the citizens can collect signatures on petitions and put a new law or new amendment on the ballot for the citizens to vote on. Then what we call the legislative referendum process, which is when the government puts an issue on the ballot for the citizens to vote on. In many countries, it's required that constitutional amendments or new constitutions must be ratified by the voters. And then what we have are our popular referendum process, where if there's an existing law on the books, the citizens can collect signatures to challenge that law and overturn that law.
But how about the thresholds for having a bill passed by the referendum? For instance, how many signatures in general for many other countries to initiate a bill?
It varies. I mean, in Switzerland, it's 100,000 signatures. In the United States, I mean, in California, it's 1.5 million signatures, but it's a state of 32 million people. And down in Florida, you have to have 200,000 signatures. Around the world, it varies anywhere from like Palau. We had a representative from Palau at our meetings. They had to have 1,800 signatures. Of course, it is 13 different islands they have to collect it off of. So it varies across the world.
In general, it's a high threshold or a low threshold?
Normally, first of all, it's important to talk about what is a usable process and what is an unusable process. I mean, you have numerous countries around the world where they have in their constitutions the initiative and referendum process, but the thresholds for signatures are so high that the citizens just can't use it.
That's right.
So I think it's important to note that a usable process, typically you have fewer number of signatures required.
And how about the so-called initiative from the people in general or from the executive branch as well, and also from the legislative body?
Well, it typically works that when the citizens want to put something on the ballot, the lawmakers make it very difficult for the citizens to do it. When the lawmakers want to put something on the ballot, the requirements are usually a lot less, and makes it easier for them to do what they want to do.
But how about the process in terms of whether we can make the so-called referendum bill a bill? Will there be any so-called review committee to review the initiative proposed by the people?
Well, and around the world it's different. In some cases, one thing that's very important is that they have committees to review it just to check on what they call the constitutionality of it. I've always thought that was funny because if you're proposing a new amendment to the Constitution, Of course, beforehand it's not constitutional, but after it's voted on, it will be constitutional because it'll be part of the Constitution. There needs to be some type of review process that's not completely controlled by the government, because governments have used their review processes as an opportunity sometimes to quash what the citizens want to do.
But sometimes people are confused by the two concepts. One is referendum, the other one is a plebiscite.
Right.
What are the major differences between the two?
Well, there are various definitions around the world. As far as initiative referendums, plebiscite, compulsory referendums, legislative referendums. Plebiscites basically is just, plebiscites, in my opinion, aren't exactly the best things in the world, because that's kind of what you see in elections that are controlled by the government, where they just, for international show, they'll put an issue on the ballot and just say, look, international community, we voted on this, and that's not truly an open process.
So it's a demonstration of popular will, general will, through plebiscite?
Well, plebiscite can be an example of popular will if it's done in a fair and open manner. If I know that, for example, some countries have drafted new constitutional reforms and given the voters 3 days before they vote on it. I mean, that's not a free and open election. A plebiscite can be fine as long as the citizens are properly informed of the matter and have been given the opportunity to learn about the issue, and not have the process completely controlled by the government.
One of the controversies that surrounds Taiwan's referendum issue is whether the government can put the date for the referendum with the day for the election for the people, for the candidates. So how about other countries' experiences?
Once again, it varies around the world, but most countries have the referendum elections at the same time as candidate elections. And there are some practical reasons for that because of cost. It's easier, to run one election versus multiple elections. But in the United States, typically it's all on one election because the benefit to the citizens, it gives them the opportunity to hear the candidate's position on the issues.
That's right.
You have a presidential candidate who has to respond to the issue and say what they think about the issue. So in many ways, it is the most practical way to do it, as well as the best way for the citizens to get the opportunity to hear all sides of the story. And it doesn't get lost. I mean, I think that what happens, there are special elections sometimes where issues are on the ballot as a standalone issue without a presidential candidate. But it's unfortunate sometimes that presidential candidates bring more media attention to the election. And so I think it is important that they all be on the same election, as well as the same physical ballot.
How about the design of ballot? And do they put the issues and the elections in the same ballot?
Most countries they do. And
Will they cause any controversies?
When they do put it, no.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that here in Taiwan, there's a lot of talk about having it on separate ballots, which I think is absolutely just crazy, to be honest with you, because I mean, there's no practical reason of any kind to have it on separate ballots. I mean, even from a logistical standpoint of transporting ballots, to have it on one ballot makes sense.
Yeah.
So from an elections officer standpoint, it makes sense to have it on one ballot. The only reason not to have it on the same ballot is if you want to somehow intimidate the voters and somehow want to coerce them in not voting a certain way. And I've seen that. We've monitored a lot of elections, and even on candidate elections, they'll have ballots based on political party.
Yeah.
And they'll have poll watchers there who are from the parties, so they can watch who picks up what ballot.
Yeah, that's right.
It's very important that you have one ballot, one physical ballot with the candidates and the issues, so that there's security and secrecy in the balloting process as well.
So secrecy is very important in terms of designing the ballot, right?
It is. It's very important because human nature is such, especially in some countries, citizens are very concerned about who what the people know or what the government knows about what they're voting for, or who they're voting for. If you have two separate ballots, it's very simple, very easy for people to watch and see how you're voting and what you're doing. But secrecy, the only way you can protect secrecy is to have it all on one ballot, one physical ballot, at one location and one box for them to put it in. I mean, this thing of having one table to pick up a candidate ballot and another one, I mean, it's crazy, and it's clearly designed as a way just to intimidate the voters.
But in terms of encouraging voters to show their position on some of the key referendum issues, are there any incentives designed by the government to encourage people to cast their votes on referendum issues?
One of the key things of a democracy is the citizens have just as much right not to participate as they do to participate. Sure. And as far as incentives are concerned, the rule has been around the world is that when there are important issues on the ballot, citizens will come out. I mean, citizens do not want to be involved in the day-to-day lawmaking of government, but they do want to vote on important issues that affect their daily lives. For example, membership in the United Nations, or whether it's joining the European Union, or whether it's adopting the euro. I mean, these are things that have a day-to-day important impact on their lives, and it has been proven around the world when there is a true and free election opportunity, the citizens will come out in droves and vote their opinions on that issue.
We know that in some countries there's a compulsory vote system. That is, citizens have to vote. It has to cast their votes in terms of election and also a referendum. Do you think that's a normal and healthy practice of democracy?
I think compulsory referendums are very critical and should be the norm. When you're voting on, I mean, there's basically three types of laws. You have your constitutional law, then you have your legislative laws, which deal with wide variety of issues, and then you have your local laws that deal with basically your day-to-day life. Whether you stop at a traffic light or you don't. I think that compulsory referendums are important on the constitutional laws, the ones that truly affect your life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Things like should there be the death penalty, or should a country have normal relations with the certain countries? I mean, compulsory referendums are critical when the citizens have to deal with, or should deal with the most important issues of the day. But the citizens do not want, they have no desire to deal with the day-to-day minutia of life. They really don't. That's why they have representative government. If the citizens were going to vote on every issue, then we wouldn't need representative government. Right. But I think compulsory referendums have been the norm. But at the same time, they have been used in inappropriate ways. I mean, you look at the history of referendums. I mean, Adolf Hitler used the referendum process to consolidate power. Yeah. The biggest problem there is that you did not have a true check and balance on the legislative referendum process. And that's critical. For there to be a true and fair referendum process, you must have a check and balance on it, just like you have to have a check and balance on other branches of government as well.
How about issues? Because in Taiwan, there are some issues that cannot be have referendum on. In other countries' experience, are there any particular issues that people cannot have referendum on?
Well, as I said before, it varies country to country, and most free and open societies, when it comes to the referendum process, they can vote on anything. I mean, it comes from the basic principle that when I elect you as a lawmaker, and you go vote on these issues, I'm not giving away my right to vote on those issues. So it's just, I'm just allowing you the opportunity, or giving you the opportunity, to take care of the day-to-day business. So the rule of thumb has been, and should be in developing democracies especially, is that when you adopt the referendum process, you should allow the citizens to vote on the same issues and items that lawmakers can. Because it doesn't make sense in a representative government that if you're, if the representative represents the people, then why should that person have more power to vote on issues than the people? So, but countries, there are a lot of limitations. I mean, even in the United States, you can only use the referendum process like in the state of Kentucky. You can only use it to abolish taxes. You can't vote on anything else.
That's right.
But in a state like California, you can vote on anything. And then some countries have it that you can vote on issues of social welfare, but you cannot vote on issues that appropriate funds. They limit you to, they believe that only lawmakers have the ability to decide how funds are spent, and the citizens shouldn't. I don't personally agree with that. But there are limitations around the world. But the best referendum process is one that allows the citizens to deal with the same exact issues that lawmakers can. And that goes into one of the issues that I have with the referendum law here in Taiwan, is that it is extremely limited. And it should be opened up to the citizens more to use on more day-to-day issues.
But apparently there are more and more referenda all over the world. But in terms of effectiveness, cost effectiveness, do you think the referendum has become a very important way of democracy in this world?
It has become a very important way. I mean, I think that you see, I mean, there's no doubt that the world is unstable in many ways, but I think that where you see that the growing use of the referendum process, stability is the norm. I mean, you look at the former European Union, I mean, the former Soviet states that now enjoy the use of the referendum process. There's greater stability there. You look at throughout Europe, there's greater stability. The United States, there's stability. Latin America, where there's a growing use of the referendum process, legitimate referendum, I should say. You have growing stability. I mean, you do have an example in Latin America where President Chavez of Venezuela is using the referendum process to consolidate power, similar to what Hitler did, and it's purely unchecked, and it's not a fair and open, balanced process. So that is actually leading to greater instability in the region. But I think that where you have where the citizens feel that they are empowered and they're in control, but just because they feel empowered and controlled and the referendum process is available, The reality is, doesn't mean they're going to use it. I mean, citizens feel comfortable with government knowing that they have that tool. So even in cases where it's not being used a lot, the citizens, it's usually citizens still feel greater secure, that their government is secure because they know they have that ability in case the government gets out of control or does things that they don't want them to do.
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier that there are some defects or limitations in Taiwan's referendum law, and there also is a lot of controversy surrounding how to implement a referendum in Taiwan, and whether some of the issues should be, referendum on. So when we come back, we'll talk about the problems that Taiwan is facing right now and how can we fix the problem. So stay with us, don't go away.